Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it is Tuesday, July the 29th, 2025. In April of this year, the New York Times ran an interesting piece about Christopher Lasch and his prescience in seeing Trump and Trumpism and his revolt against elites. It was by the cultural critic Alexander Nazarian. And Nazarian's piece on Lasch has been followed up with another excellent piece on the influence of Christopher Lasch in making sense of our current historical situation, predicament, by my old friend, the Istanbul-based political thinker, theorist, cultural critic, Soli Ozel. He has a new piece called Lashing Out in the Ideas Letter. And Soli is, as always, joining us from a rather hot and sticky Istanbul. Soli, welcome to history.
Well, hi. Hello, Andrew. Yes, it's very hot and very sticky. You can hardly breathe.
So, well, you can hardly breathe here either, whether or not it's hot on the streets, it's hot politically. We're still trying to digest everything that's happening in America, particularly in 2025. And like Nazarian, you note that Christopher Lasch, the old American, the no longer existing American political historian, social critic Christopher Lasch, may hold a key to making sense of our current predicament. Tell me about Lasch, Soli. You have a long love affair with him, intellectually at least, don't you?
I actually do. And I must say, writing the piece, I discovered works of his that I have not previously read. And I did not realize that he was such a prolific writer, because there are dozens, literally, of articles that he published in different publications, which I really, truly appreciated. My affair, if you will, with Lasch started with his earlier books on the tragedy of American radical left. Then, of course, like everyone else, I've read his most popular book, which is The Culture of Narcissism. And when I was a teacher in Washington in 1995, The Revolt of the Elites came out. And along with a couple of other books, that was a book that really shaped my view of the pitfalls that became much more apparent later on of the hyper-globalization period that the 1990s were. And I have not read the article you mentioned. I missed it. But I would argue that it's not just in The Revolt of the Elites that we can say Lasch has predicted or foresaw the coming of Trumpism. I think it's a lot earlier than that. And I was particularly impressed by this book, The One and True Heaven, which is probably his most substantive book, 600 pages long.
Yeah, 1991.
And there, I also had
Progress and its Critics.
Yeah, and Progress and its Critics. And there's at the beginning of it a short, maybe 10 to 20 pages, autobiographical essay. And that really made me understand Lasch and identify his struggles, inside struggles, and his contradictions. But my respect for him really grew enormously, although I saw many more weaknesses in the argument after I dwelled on this particular project.
So what is it exactly that Lasch is saying? I mean, there are others like Lasch. Daniel Bell comes to mind. Other cultural critics. But what is it about Lasch that makes his work so prescient?
I think, unlike the others, by the way, there is this famous moment when Culture of Narcissism is published, and Lasch is invited to, I think, Camp David to meet with President Carter, who then says he used the book for his famous or infamous malaise speech when he told the American public that maybe they were becoming too materialistic and all that. Daniel Bell was with him. I discovered through my.
And we had Daniel Bell's son, David Bell, on the show. I think he teaches history at Princeton a few months ago.
And he's also a very interesting thinker as far as I'm concerned. That is David Bell, and of course Daniel Bell as well, a controversial figure because of the title of the book, End of Ideology. But I think his cultural contradictions of capitalism, I think, run a fairly parallel to what Lasch was also identifying. I see them really coming, if not from the same, they don't come from the same background, but I think their perspectives were very much alike. But what differentiates Lasch, I think, is that he squarely puts the onus on the elites for the breakdown of American democracy, and that he does very early on, and that he relates to capitalism and to bureaucratization. And what I found, I mean, I may have missed it, but I've only seen two places where he mentions Max Weber. And of course, Max Weber's prediction that the modern society, bureaucratized, would be basically living in an iron cage is actually the way I think Lasch sees the world as well. And the second person I think Lasch's thought is very similar to, or I think he was impressed by, was Karl Polanyi, but I never found a reference to Karl Polanyi in the writings of his that I had the chance to read.
Max Weber is again coming back into fashion. We had your old friends Jeff Kopstein, Steve Hansen on the show.
I've listened to that podcast
about the reappearance within Trump of patrimonialism. So let's get to the core, Soli. You know Lasch inside out, but what is he saying about elites? Is it a uniquely American argument? I mean, you're always going to have elites. We did a show a couple of months ago about Italian theorists of elites, particularly Pareto. Elites always exist, for better or worse. Americans aren't always comfortable with them. Was Lasch's argument specifically about perhaps the contradiction between American democracy and American capitalism, or American socioeconomic elite?
No, I think, first of all, my understanding of Lasch is he's not per se against elites. What he is pained by is that the new elites, the elites of modern times, do not have the sense of responsibility, the term noblesse oblige, that they don't have this sense of responsibility towards society that old elites had by definition. And that is for him the crux of the matter. And he thinks that the new elites, and I think this all goes back to the 1940s when the book Managerial Class came out.
James Burnham's the ex-Marxist.
Yeah. And that the managerial elite looked down upon the general public or working people. They found them uncouth. They found them to be, in their inclinations, very racist, xenophobic, authoritarian, and all that. And that they not only economically but also culturally, they differentiated themselves from them. And they actually, in one very audacious claim, he says that the elites, they didn't even try to convince the lower classes or the uneducated classes whom they found uncouth, that their ways, that the elites' ways, the way of they looked at the world, the way they experienced the world and all that was really a better way of living. And that they preferred not just to ignore them. And if that caused apathy, he argues that was okay for the elite.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
these
yeah.
guys
I wonder if Hillary Clinton had been reading Christopher Lasch when she made her remark about the deplorables.
She should have, and I suppose at least she must have read The Culture of Narcissism.
Well,
But again,
I'm not sure she would have really got the point, because
but
she is
you see,
exactly the example of the kind of elite that Lasch was critiquing, right?
Yeah. Now, but the thing is, I'll go back to your first question. Lasch was not alone in warning the elites, political and social elites, and economic elites, naturally, in the United States about what might come. There were others. I mean, when I said that was one of the books that truly impressed me and made me think about these matters. Another one was Todd Gitlin, the Twilight of the Commons. In Todd Gitlin, you find the precursor to the critiques of wokeism, for instance. Or another one was Robert Reich. I mean, Lasch is very critical of Reich, I think a bit unfairly, but Reich also saw what the new class structure of the globalizing age was going to be, and he did see that actually as problematic. And, you know, he was the Secretary of Labor under the first Clinton administration, and obviously his stance, his social views, his political views went against the grain of a very hyper-globalization Clinton administration and the other members of the cabinet. So, but Lasch, I think, was the most forceful and the most consistent critique of what was happening, and his criticism was not limited to the 90s, but he took it from the late 1970s.
So let's try and get into this idea that American elites don't have noblesse oblige, the sense of responsibility. Was his analysis or your analysis, because you're my representative of Christopher Lasch now, because he's no longer around, so he's channeling, you're channeling him in this conversation, Soli.
Yeah.
Was this bound up with the ideology of the meritocracy, the idea that
he thinks meritocracy is a hoax.
In terms of this meritocracy, that American elites saw themselves as somehow having the right to social, political, cultural, and particularly economic power because of their hard work, and therefore they didn't have any sense of responsibility back to society?
Yes, and that he sees as a function of the wrong-headed individualism that he believes the cultural left began to work on in the late 1960s. That's really one of the reasons why he broke with the radical left in the late 1960s. He remains an anti-capitalist, anti-corporate capitalist in his political economy views, and what really makes him juicy for conservatives as well, that on cultural matters he sounds much more like conservatives, especially on family and the role of religion in society. But look, again, he is a precursor to the arguments that actually were proliferating 4 or 5 years ago about how meritocracy was not really what everybody thought it was supposed to be. I mean, there's the Harvard professors, Yale professors, Markovits at Yale.
We've had Markovits and the other guy from Harvard on the show lots of times talking about this.
And they actually were, and they're liberals, and they may not share some of Lasch's views either economically or culturally, but they were also very critical of this ideology of meritocracy, and not to mention the kind of incredible cost that meritocratic ideology imposes on those that actually believe in it and basically live their lives to work rather than work in order to live their lives.
Yeah, and you and I are both perhaps refugees from this class, but also part of the class. It's intimately bound up with the American university and its crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so too, yeah. And that's also part of the themes. Again, as I said, he's a prolific writer. There is one that I really adored, that there are several, but one I should mention. It's the history of the story of JFK assassination. I mean, it really is fascinating. Or
that's a book?
It's an article. It's an article, or another article on the 50th anniversary of George Orwell's 1984, or another one on the 50th class reunion of his Harvard class. I mean, this is a man who studied at Columbia, at Harvard, so Ivy Leaguer. Everybody appreciated his brilliance, but he felt not of that environment.
So I'm guessing if
I think he's a
dropping
Midwesterner
down on us
through and
now,
through.
Soli, he would be half amused by what's happening with Trump's attack on the university and this peculiar kind of class warfare that the MAGA conservatives have unleashed on the American elite.
Yeah, I am not. I mean, again, there you enter really a critical space for me, because I find that Lasch was far too optimistic about the values that purportedly these lower classes actually possessed, or they embodied in themselves, and this is someone who lashed out against optimism, and he thought hope was the right word to use and not optimism. And then he was nostalgic about a pre-corporate capitalism, I think, which was actually never going to come. So I think he identified the problems. I really don't think he had time. He died very early at 62. He preferred to finish the book rather than getting cured for his cancer at the age of 62. And he really could not formulate how, in a globalized world and he laments the fact that money destroys the family, bureaucratization both in the private sector and in the state, in the government, and all of that. He really could not offer an alternative way of organizing either economic life or
Maybe there isn't
life.
one. I'm also guessing we've got Michael Lind, who's been on the show several times.
Yeah.
He has a new piece out. Lind and Thomas Frank, kind of populist figures traditionally on the left, although not all people on the left like him. They're also inheritors of Laschism, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, it's good that you mentioned, because I like both authors. But for instance, Thomas Frank, who wrote this bestseller, What's the Matter with Kansas, which I liked and I used in my class on American politics, but he could never answer the question. And Lasch is very different, I think, because you have had as guests people who've written about populism. And the new bunch of crop of people who write about populism believe that populism is inherently anti-democratic because it is exclusionary. Populists claim that they and only they represent the people, the right people, and they are anti-elitist, but it's not just being anti-elitist, but they're also anti-pluralist. Now, Lasch identifies them as anti-elitist, but he does not really identify them as anti-pluralist, although he recognizes that they can be so. And many of the articles and books written about populism today would have this quote from Lasch in order to say he was wrong, because Lasch says populism is the heart of democracy. And the way we are seeing populism develop today, certainly right-wing populism develop today, with its exclusionary understanding of society and all of that, no, it is not. It is not conducive to democracy. To the contrary, right-wing populism is conducive to autocracy. And in that sense, I think Lasch both tried to make a case for popular classes in a way Latin American literature on populism also did, but he could not really be critical enough to see that this might be that the negative aspects that of their identity that he actually talks about in his books and in his articles would actually prevail in an anti-democratic fashion, which is why I also think he asks in The Revolt of the Elites, in one of the pieces, a very pertinent question: does democracy deserve to survive?
Yeah, I mean, this question of whether, and you address this in your excellent piece, democracy
in the last
deserves
part
to
of my
survive.
essay, yes.
I mean, given his analysis of democracy, or his analysis of the class-based American socioeconomic system dominated by these elites who don't have any noblesse oblige and who are deluded by their own place. What's the value of democracy? Who cares?
Well, the thing is, you may not care because, I mean, his argument is, I mean, it's not just the ideal of democracy that we need to talk about. We also need to talk about whether or not democracy delivers. And when he means delivers material goods, delivers happiness, delivers a better life, delivers a life with civic virtue, which he thinks is the most important thing that sustains a society rather than atomizing people who live together, but they don't constitute a whole and all that. And his answer is if democracy cannot deliver those material and non-material goods, then why should anybody care about it as an abstract concept? And I think what we've seen in the 2024 elections, when both Kamala Harris's supporters and Donald Trump's supporters, they said that they were in favor of democracy, but what they meant by democracy were not necessarily the same thing. In fact, they weren't. One side actually meant by democracy the liberal values that are embodied in the democracy that we've known in the past decades. So rule of law, independence of the judiciary, separation of powers, and all those things. Whereas the others were like, okay, economically we are being squeezed. We are asking our politicians to actually make our lives better. They pretend to be listening, but they're not doing anything about it. And we as demos want to let's get the rascals out. And then suddenly someone like Trump becomes the symbol of that rebellion, and then gets their support on.
So let's talk about the last election. I don't want to talk about Trump. I want to talk about Kamala Harris. It struck me at the time, and it was made me particularly popular, that she was about as oblivious to her role or lack of a role in history as any other presidential candidate. Firstly, she could never explain why she wanted to be president, maybe because she didn't know why she wanted to be. But she also fundamentally lied in that she presented herself as this product of the American dream, when in fact she's part of the very elite that Lasch writes about. So in the person of Kamala Harris, why couldn't, and I'm interested in your response to this and also what Lasch might say, why couldn't Kamala Harris simply tell the truth, that she was part of an elite, a group of people who legally, culturally, economically, who dominate American society, and that she has a responsibility then to make America a better place? She wasn't able to tell the truth. Trump, of course, is a consummate liar, but at least he's aware of or semi-aware of his own lies. What's the problem with people like Harris, that they can't acknowledge that they're part of the American elite?
Well, Andrew, as always, you mince your words. And
I'll be clear, my wife's friendly with Harris, and she and I don't agree on this. I mean, I know all these people.
No, okay. Now, the thing is, I mean, first of all, I did not think she was the best candidate, but she was also both objectively and subjectively in an impossible situation. And she never, I don't think she's ever thought through what she could do to get out of that bind either. That is, she is part of the managerial class, and she doesn't question it. I don't think so. And what's the crisis of the Democratic Party? The cultural, social principles and values of the managerial class have been rebuked by the public. That's what wokeism was about. There were dissenters, but that's anyway. The right managed to use this very powerfully. And thirdly, she was part of an administration that was very unpopular, in spite of the fact that it did a lot of good things for the inhabitants of red states. Maybe they have not materialized by the time of the elections. And she really could not dissociate herself from that administration. I mean, remember when she was asked whether there was anything that she could see that Biden did not do right, she said, I really cannot think of anything. And then she basically buried herself. But I think you are absolutely right. nobody has found out, because she never said it, what she stood for. What she stood against, we're not going back, was valid enough. But what did she stand for? What did she offer to a public which was up in arms, if you so to say, because of inflation, because of this and that and the other, and the cultural and social elitism of the class that she was a representative of, and the feeling that they were betrayed by those elites. I mean, it's not for nothing that 7 million Biden voters, to the best of my knowledge, did not even go to the polls, and that would have made a big difference. And she really could not appeal to them. And finally, I think the fact that she did not become the candidate of the Democratic Party as a result of a competitive primary, but she was anointed, if you will, that also rubbed people the wrong way. Now, a lot of people who did not go to vote may now regret it, but that's a bit late.
Yeah, and I take all those points. I don't want to turn this in. I'm less interested in the politics of Harris. I'm more interested in this Laschian quality of hers.
Yeah.
Of not acknowledging, and it's not just her, it's the narrative of the coastal elites, whether they're in New York or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or San Francisco, where I live, this inability to acknowledge or recognize that they are the ones who hold power. And then their narrative on Trump is that, oh, he's part of an alternative elite, which I don't think is even true. May have some truth, but what is it about the elites, the real elites in America, of Silicon Valley, of Washington, of New York, of the Upper West Side, Upper East Side, that makes it so hard for them to recognize that they're part of an elite?
I guess I disagree with you. I don't think they don't recognize it. They may not acknowledge it. But look, when push came to shove, all of them, even those who after January 6, 2020, have basically said they would have nothing to do with Donald Trump anymore, when it was about their material interests, the economic policies of Biden versus Trump, and in the case of Silicon Valley, those who presented themselves as super duper liberal, socially very permissive and all that guys, most of them, not all of them obviously, they did not want to be actually regulated. At the end of the day, in economic terms, American capital's different segments, including the tech bros, Wall Street people, many industrialists, they decided that they did not want a regulated capitalism, which the Biden administration was actually proposing. And then they voted for Trump and thinking wishfully that his policies would be actually satisfying to them. And then a lot of them lamented that. The way people at the top of the economic elite changed their discourse 2 or 3 times in the course of the last few years is quite mind-boggling. So it's, again, self-interest, which Lasch is truly very angry about, that you only think of your self-interest and not the broader societal interest. We've seen this play out, especially in the 2024 elections, not to mention the reaction of the public to what they perceive to be failed policies of the Biden administration.
You mentioned Biden, you talked about Carter and Clinton, Hillary and Bill. Are there, in your view, examples of people on the left or progressive, certainly within the Democratic Party, who, whether or not they've actually read Christopher Lasch, are manifesting this noblesse oblige? John Kerry comes to mind, perhaps.
This was supposed to be the vice presidential candidate's position, right? Waltz, that he was supposed to be an earthly Midwesterner who actually cared. He was in National Guard duty and stuff. It just didn't wash. I guess it was not enough to convince the electorate.
I'm sure also Harris's failure to actually find a vice president who was coherent was another manifestation of her failure. She probably should have chosen the
governor of Pennsylvania,
right, Shapiro, who was perhaps a little more honest than others. But
no, I'm sure there are plenty of people in the Democratic Party who understood. But look at what the Democratic Party did to Bernie Sanders in 2016.
So let's get back to Lasch. Okay. What would Christopher Lasch say about Sanders and AOC?
I think with Sanders, he would have a lot of things in common. I think he would understand why, and he would endorse the prioritization of the material condition of the American working class, the way globalization has harmed their interests, and how, because of their material hardships, their lives are disintegrating, the family is disintegrating, the opioid crisis is killing thousands of people, and it's a white America, white uneducated lower class America crisis, as Buster Keaton and his spouse, and I can't remember her last name, I apologize, have written so much about, you know.
Angus Beaton and Ann Case, again, people who have been on the show.
Yeah, so Deaths of Despair was something
Princeton
that,
economist.
Yeah, that Bernie Sanders prioritizes, and I think that would be music to Lasch's ears. As for AOC, again, she is also prioritizing those issues. She is obviously in social and cultural matters. Is unlike Lasch, who is, as I said, the way I read him, he is a conservative, not a conservative in the sense that the Project 2025 conservatism presents the role of the women and the family. But Lasch never really gets to answer what a modern family in which women, not just for material reasons, but because they want to fulfill their own dreams, they want a career and whatever, how we could balance the family obligations or the needs to sustain the family and the needs for individuals to actually be able to do whatever it is that they want to do, which they think they can do very well. And those questions are present in his work, but those are not really answered. I mean,
is any of this any different from the split on the left in the 1960s between the new left and the unions that so many people have written about?
It's an extension of it because it has worsened. And, look, the manufacturing working class makes up only 8.4% of the American employment. And this is after Biden tried to, like Trump does today, to reindustrialize the United States, to open up, to make available new manufacturing jobs. Apparently, there was a higher percentage of manufacturing jobs when he started than when his term ended. So again, all these are much more complicated stories, and I'm not seeing this being addressed. And for the Democratic Party, which I'm sure Lasch would be lashing out at, quite frankly, especially in its current or incarnation, there seems to be a crisis of either understanding what is wrong or why they can't appeal to the public, or a denial that they are in their current state, they cannot. I mean, I read very carefully Thomas Edsel's columns in the New York Times.
Yeah, Edsel's been on
every other week, and it's and I come from Turkey. We've seen this. It's not enough that an administration or a government fails. You've got to have an opposition that can actually convince the electorate that they can run the country. And at this point, obviously, these guys cannot, and there are both personality reasons for that, but also cultural and social reasons, which they don't recognize.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that Lasch would not be a great fan of either AOC or Mamdani now who's running in for the New York mayorship. What was his attitude?
Oh no. I'm not sure at all. Why would Lasch reject or object to the offer of more childcare centers or city-run supermarkets or free bus services? I don't know exactly what the extent of that was going to be. Why would he be objecting to that? Because he would see these things as fortifying the family.
What was his attitude to Seawright Mill?
Oh, he liked Seawright Mills. They may have. I mean, when he was in Colombia, he may also have worked with them. His person. I mean, the person he worked with most closely in Colombia was Hofstadter, Richard Hofstadter.
Yeah, who wrote the wonderful.
In fact, he wrote
on the paranoid style of American democracy.
But he disagrees with that paranoid style article's argument. But he wrote the introduction to a new edition of Hofstadter's American Political Tradition, which is also a great introduction, by the way.
We just had Sam Tannenhouse on the show, who's just written a 900-page biography of William
I'm looking forward to reading it too.
Yeah, we need probably a biography. Maybe you could write it, Soli, of Lasch. I wouldn't be surprised if someone's writing one right now.
Somebody did write a biography of Lasch, actually, a few years ago. But
was it any good? Who wrote it?
Because in addition to the article that you mentioned, I saw just yesterday another one talking about or presenting how Lasch was so angry with the way the quality of the use of language among his students, both in writing and in speech, were declining every year. He even wrote a manual of style in writing.
So ultimately, he strikes me as, in many ways, deeply conservative. Lee Seagull, who's another iconoclastic thinker, wrote a piece in the New Statesman in December last year, writing about Lasch, who he connects with Bannon and Trump, arguing that we must all be left conservatives now. Is that really what Lasch is saying? Is that anyone on the left is really, if they're genuinely on the left, they are really conservatives? There's nothing, of course, about Trump that really makes him a conservative.
No. I mean, again, my piece also suggests that Lasch is economically a leftist and culturally is conservative. In that sense, Daniel Bell also considers himself economically a socialist, politically a liberal, and culturally a conservative. Yeah. Again, this is not really the conservatism as in being close to being a reactionary. These guys are conservatives because they want change to be incremental and they want it to be less destructive. Whether or not in a rampant capitalist economy you can actually do that is the big question. But they were trying to propose that it needs to be catered to, that leaders, elites ought to think about those disruptions and try to make it less painful for those who would be on the receiving end of those transformative changes. In that sense, it is. I mean, Samuel Coleridge is known as a poet, but he was also a political thinker. And that is the kind of conservatism that I think Lasch would be close to. It's incremental, it favors change, not progress as Lasch criticizes. It favors change, it favors changing society, but it also favors maintaining certain things so that people could have references that are still there in order to be able to lead their lives.
So politically, Soli, what needs to happen? What are we looking for within the Democratic Party? You mentioned that maybe AOC or Mamdani are part of the answer, but to reach the American population, going back to Weber, do we need some sort of left conservative, charismatic, who can take on Trump and Trumpism?
You need a leader. I think what the last couple of decades in politics of the democratic world have shown to us that leadership does matter. Leadership does matter. So you need a leader that can articulate a program that can also appeal to different constituencies. Look, New York City's dynamics are obviously not the same as, I don't know, Houston's dynamics, okay, or Des Moines' dynamics and whatever. But so you can, I mean, when Roosevelt put the New Deal coalition together, elements of that coalition did not necessarily see eye to eye on everything.
Yeah, to put it mildly, talking of the FDR coalition, of course, it was made up of
So you need to be
Southern racists. So
exactly.
I'm not sure if we want to go back to that.
Black workers, unionized black workers. So you need to be able to forge coalitions, and in order to forge coalitions, you need to not be absolutists. And that, I think, especially on cultural matters, this absolutism of the educated classes in the United States had become a problem that ought to be overcome. That's how I see it.
Maybe history has its own logic here with AI and the attacks on the university and the cost of the university. Maybe history will undermine this class. I wonder also, we did a show recently on the Scopes trial, whether William Jennings Bryan, who was always a rather mocked figure in Democratic history, I think he ran for president as a Democrat 4 times, lost each time, whether he might also offer some ways of thinking about progressivism in the 21st century.
It is the kind. I haven't seen anything that Lasch has written directly about William Jennings Bryan, but I think he is sympathetic to him. He would be sympathetic to him, because that's the kind of populism that he believes was the right kind of populism. That it reflected the needs and aspirations of those who were hurting by the way corporate capitalism was being shaped, and project that to 100 years later when he was writing. That actually was something that he would favor. That is the kind of populism that he favors. If he saw how right-wing populism really engenders authoritarianism almost by definition, I'm not sure that he would be happy about that either.
Let's end, Soli, looking internationally. You are a keen observer of American culture and politics. You and I have known each other many years. We studied together in Berkeley. You've lived in Washington, D.C., on the East Coast, on the West Coast, but now you're based in Istanbul. You're a fellow of the Institut Montaigne in France. You're a very global fellow. To what extent is Lasch's critique of American politics
pertinent for the rest of the world
when it comes to Turkey or France or the United Kingdom or Italy? Or is this really uniquely an American phenomenon?
I don't think it's uniquely American, but of course in different cultures it has its variations. I think you and I had one program many years ago when I suggested to you that especially in developing countries, populism was the political movement of the rising classes, whereas in developed capitalist countries, it was the movement of declining classes. And I tend to think that this is still a valid observation, but then elites then grab that particular energy and decide to present a political program that at the end of the day, as we've seen before in history, turn out against the interests of those that have supported that particular populist leader or that populist movement. I mean, the budget that was recently passed being a good example of Trump voters probably not being protected by the administration that they have chosen back in November of 2024. But one thing I think is critical, and I think this is what your question truly implied, the world that was formed after the World War II, for all, I mean, warts and all, was a liberal world, liberal principles and values. They were betrayed many times, but that is what defined how we actually approached the world, how we lived our lives, and analyzed problems. That world is over. And liberalism, and this is Lasch's main point, liberalism has no answer to these things because it can no longer be creating any passion, and that it has no sense of a societal ethic any longer that it can present convincingly to the mass of the population, because it has been so alienated from the demos, if you will. And the fact that this is what happens domestically, and this is in an environment where the liberal order is being basically killed by its creator, makes the fight for democracy a lot harder, a lot more arduous, and at least at my age, for myself, far more valuable to fight.
And final question, Soli. You mentioned Hofstadter, Lasch being close, but he didn't like Hofstadter's piece on the paranoid style of American democracy.
Yeah, he thought it reflected this liberal prejudice.
Well, I think we're all liberals and probably in that sense prejudiced. I liked it, and I think it's very relevant today. You note the lack of passion within liberalism, but the one element of passion is this hysteria about Trumpism, authoritarianism, the crisis. From Lasch's point of view and from your point of view, is that true? Should liberals, the few of us who are left, should we be hysterical about this current moment in history, or is it just another moment?
Hysteria may be self-satisfactory in a weird way, but it's no cure. You've got to be politically engaged and work. And look, Trump didn't come out of the blues. There were precedents. And can you really understand the rise of Trumpism without the Tea Party? And the Tea Party, whether you like them or not, was an impressive organized political movement. I mean, Theda Skocpol wrote about this, and it's a pretty impressive book with a colleague. I can't remember.
Yeah, and as Sam Tannenhouse notes, you cannot explain Trump or the Tea Party without Buckley. So this goes back a long way, back to the 60s.
Yeah, these days, one author I use in my talks most often is William Faulkner.
Ooh.
And William Faulkner. And there is a line in one of his novels, it says, the past is not dead. It's not even past. That's why Buckley can be seen. You see, that those movements, what we see now today embodied in the Trump administration, those thoughts, those beliefs, those values, those principles were there. They were suppressed because the liberal values had the upper hand because they could deliver. Now that they can no longer deliver, that undead past is up and is presenting to us a new way of ordering society, new principles in ordering society and stuff. So in that, I really think Faulkner was onto something when his character actually uttered those words.
Well, you've just come out with a wonderful piece on Christopher Lasch called Lashing Out. Next piece, Soli, I hope will be on William Faulkner. Maybe you can use Faulkner to make sense of our current situation, predicament. Fascinating conversation, Soli. As always, we'll talk again in the not too distant future. This story is certainly not finishing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.
And you, I hope I didn't lash out too much. You certainly didn't.